So good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for. Um, we're 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 happy to see the number of folks to show up today. We certainly appreciate you being here. Come on in. Come on in. And so I'm Walter Jackson, the superintendent of schools for LaPorte ISD, and I'm certainly honored and proud to be the superintendent of schools and happy to be here today speaking to you about the bond. Myself and our deputy superintendent, Dr. Dustin Bromley, to share some insightful information with you, and hopefully that it's informative and that we are doing our part to educate you on the bond. Just a couple of things that I want you to know about it is the bond is coming. We've been working on this now roughly 20 months. We've been really talking about the bond, and I certainly am appreciative to the Board of Trustees for voting unanimously to support us as we bring forth this bond for the community, because this bond is all about supporting the staff and students of LaPorte ISD. This is about supporting and creating and building a brighter future for LaPorte Independent School District. So with that, I just have a few things that I would like to share. Number one, bonds say a whole lot about what a community believes about the future and their values. And so we want to make certain that our students attend clean schools, up-to-date schools, schools that are state-of-the-art, facilities that take care of and support the learning, the growth, and development of our students. The other thing that bonds do is bonds tell us what we value about the future of our school district. So not only are we taking care of the present with the campuses that we have, but bonds talk about future buildings and future facilities and future transportation needs and future technology needs for the school district. While we are not growing by leaps and bounds, there are families that are moving to this area. And we want to make certain that we have all of the necessary support systems and facility systems and transportation systems and technology systems that are necessary to meet the needs of the 21st century learner. These students are not only competing with students in the Houston, the Dallas, the San Antonio, the Austin area, but the students that we're educating today, ladies and gentlemen, we are helping them to be prepared to compete with students in Asia and in Europe and China and wherever. I mean, students are competing now at a global level, and so we want to make sure our students have what they need to be successful. The last thing I want to share is that our district, was founded in 1915, and we have had a strong tradition, if you will, of taking care of students and making sure that our students receive what they need to be successful. With that, we have been fortunate enough to not have to call for a bond every 3 or 4 years, as in fast growth districts. Generally speaking, and I believe Dr. Bromley will touch on this as well, LaPorte has been fortunate to where we will have called for a bond every 8 to 9 years, going back as far as 1995, and then 2014, and then now we're calling for a bond as well. And so we want to make sure that you understand the facts about this, and we'll ask that you will always go to lpisd.org. We have an entire page dedicated to the bond. Feel free to call the superintendent's office. Feel free to contact the deputy superintendent's office or the Office of Communications, and we will be more than happy to address any of your needs and concerns and questions. And without further ado, I'll come back a little later, but we're going to turn it over to Dr. Bromley, and he's going to share a little bit more specifics about the bond. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. And again, good evening. Use that there. Yes, tonight, hopefully we get a chance to kind of provide some history of LPISD as it relates to bonds. and then more so dig a little deeper into the 2023 bond. As you can tell, and as he mentioned already, the history of bonds in LPISD date back to 1995, partly because a recapture started in 1994, and I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. But in 2005, $203 million bond was passed, and then 2014, most recently, a $260 million bond. See here proposed in 2023 is a $235 million bond. It is critical to note as we talk about bonds is how they are used. And if there's one thing that we leave you tonight is knowing that bonds cannot fund salaries and pay for teachers and support. And I'll explain kind of what that looks like from the financial structure, but that's important to note. What bonds do is they take care of infrastructure and buildings and technology and transportation, safety and security and those components. Those are the items, obviously, that can be allocated in bonds and are definitely allocated in our bond. When you look at school finance, we talk about it in a lens of two buckets. Obviously, there's an overall tax rate, and you can see that at the top of $1.2565, and then it gets broken apart in what we call a left side bucket and a right side bucket. On that left side, we have our general operating fund or our maintenance and operation. So what that is, that's our everyday component, and that's also where our salaries lie. 86% of that left side bucket is people. It's our teachers and our support staff and so forth. The other 14%, utilities, supplies, fuel. Obviously, we've got fleet throughout the district, transportation, and so forth. So that's what lies on that left side. And then on the right side is our debt service or interest and sinking, and this is the bond side. That right side piece is built for long-term debt, much like at your home. When you go to buy a new home, you go and you finance that home or get a mortgage for 15 to 30 years. That right side bucket is allocated to support debt in our district and to support bond programs. So that just kind of gives you a general. It's like. Also important to note is recapture, and recapture is only affected on the left side bucket. So bonds are not subject to recapture because they're voted on by the community, which means if they're voted on and approved, 100% of those proceeds and funds stay within school district. So let's talk about recapture, and this is important, and not every district obviously has this issue, or a part of this process. In 1994, the state allocated something called recapture, put in place. It's also known as Robin Hood, and I'll kind of read it up there. Essentially what it is, like Robin Hood, it's, you take from the rich to the poor. Time period, the state allocated Chapter 41 districts or property wealthy school districts, and LaPorte ISD is one of those. So they are one of several districts throughout the state that are a part of what we call recapture. Now this is critical to us, and I'll explain that in the amount of money that the district has given back to the state. But the best way I can put it, the state has a formula that they used based on the amount of enrollment or the amount of students that we have. And for us as a district, we have around 7,200 students. We're not extremely large. So they take that formula based off the amount of kids, and they say, this is the size of cup or glass that you guys need to operate annually. Okay? So we all have different sizes. If you go to Fairbanks, you're probably going to see a very large cup because they're a large school district. They have a lot of kids. So we have our size of cup. And then every year annually, we get our revenue source, which is local taxes. And that revenue comes in this picture like water. And what happens is for LaPorte ISD, we have more revenue than what the state says that we need to operate based off the amount of kids that we serve. So in that third picture, you can see the water go outside of our cup, of our glass, and instead of us getting to keep that, because it is local taxes, it's taxes in our community, the state takes that back. That's called recapture. It's very significant in this district. This year alone, we've given back $59 million to the state. Since 2009, $437 million over 14 years has been given back to the state of Texas. That's huge and critical as far as how we are set, because the reality is recapture occurs going back on the left side bucket. And remember, 86% of what's in that left side bucket is people, is staff and salaries. So the district over time has moved items out of that left side and supported it by bond programs. But remember, bonds are not subject to recapture, and that's why they're voted on, and once voted on, they are not subject to that. So the question of how can we do this with no tax impact or not raising the taxes, there's two items that we outline and talk about in this. The first thing is the history of the district pertaining to past bonds, doing two things great at that. One, paying bonds off early, right, before they're in debt. So having money, being able to pay those things off, being very responsible with those payments. And part two is refinancing. If you bought a home in 2004, and let's say you got an interest rate of, 5.2%, and then, this last couple years ago, you went to refinance your home, and I think rates were at 1.9%, give or take. You save a tremendous amount of money on principal. Maybe you even refinance at a shorter term. So, and since 2004, has saved over $32 million in that piece right there. So that's the first part. Part two is we have a growing tax base. We are not what you consider a rooftop district. The districts around us, most of their tax revenue is based off homes. We're not that way. We are heavily, taxed off refinery, chemical plants. Obviously, you go up and down our streets in LaPorte and surrounding us, that's what we have. That has grown every year looking back. So the base has continued to grow. To give you a perspective, and I'll just do a quick little graph up here, a year zero graph there, tax rate of $1.25. If our current district, and this is just an example, at year zero, if 1.25 gives us that amount of bar, and then let's say year 0 to 1, the district pays some debt off early, or we refinance some debt, obviously 1.25 continues to give us that amount, but we don't have as much to pay, so it gives us room to continue to add debt, right? Year 1 to 2, we continue to do that, and obviously that's how current tax rate can support debt. Bonds do not get paid off all at once. The state of Texas has designed the school system to hold and have debt. So this is a great example. This is 2223 of surrounding districts. You can see Beaumont, LaPorte, Deer Park, Texas City, Barbers Hill. So in the first column, you have current outstanding debt. As I sit here today, that is the current amount of debt that those districts have. So let's look at us at LaPorte. We currently have 207 active debt. The second column is the annual assessed values that come into our district. So we have a tax of $14.3 billion, right? Property wealthy. We have a debt to assessed value ratio of 1.88. That's the best on there outside of Beaumont. So we are in great shape to continue to build on our bond program. But it's important to note the very far column, the authorized but unissued, on May 6th, the voting occurs. On May 7th, if the bond passes, again, we do not sell $235 million all at once. It's done based off projects. Some's allocated for 5 years, some 15, some 20, some 25. But what happens is it first starts in that far right column, and it's unassigned. And then as we have programs, whatever we're doing, we're building things, to assign it. It's done in order to stay under that $1.25 tax rate and be able to support that so we don't raise that tax. So it just gives you an example. For instance, Texas City, they have $172 million of current debt. They have a tax base of $6.7 billion. And then they have $158.6 million that they've not sold out. So it's not assigned yet. I don't know what their bond program looks like. If they're going to build a school in next year and sell that, they would then add that into their column on the left. I say that to say this. We are to have debt. That right side bucket is created. Buying a home, we are built to do that. The state has allocated the system to support that. And then part two, we are in such good shape. If we took $235 million on May 7th and once, which we wouldn't do, we would actually only be at about 4.26%. We wouldn't even be at the bottom as far as that. But again, bonds do not get sold at once. So when you look at what the actual bond looks like, it is broken apart in 3 propositions. This is important because in 2014, if you're a part of voting on that bond or if you're in our community at that time, it's very different. You were able to go and you voted, yes or no. Everything was inside one proposition. That changed. In 2019, the state changed laws and they make you break different things apart if they're added in. So for instance, B for us is technology. Any technology portable device, essentially laptops, iPads, one-to-one devices, that what we call it in the education, has to be in its own proposition. So that's B for us. And then for us, we have a stadium on the proposition. So any facility that seats 1,000 plus spectators also has to be on its own proposition. It's unique. A is the general bond. Obviously, that's our campus, that's safety and security. Preventative maintenance. B for us is iPads, one-to-one devices, and then C is stadium. Each one of these propositions have to be voted on separately. So it's critical to note that A, B, E also. There was an 18-month process with steering committee members, faculty, teachers, principals, parents, and community members that allocated and looked at the needs of the district, and that's how we got to this point. So Proposition A, 164 million, Proposition B, 15 million, and Proposition C, 56 million, and all these together 235 million at no tax impact. So let's talk about A real quick. As we look at A, this is our general bond. This is our 10-year plan. It's the preventative maintenance component. It's our campuses. It's the HVAC systems. It's roofs are repaired and there's no leaking and no flooding and plumbing and all the things. But at the time, ensuring that all our campuses are uniform as far as how we approach safety and security, with silent panic systems in place, window security and film across the district, perimeter fencing, and all these different elements that'll be pushing that out in this bond. Also with facilities, new carpet, tables, chairs, looking at different components for restrooms and ensuring that we can continue to be at the top notch as we move into the next 8 to 10 years. Student programs, fine art. I mean, what we're standing in right now, obviously being able to have and components that work, different systems and lighting and so forth throughout. Furniture, fixture, and equipment. So now we're talking about teachers' chairs, we're talking about cafeteria tables, we're talking about student desks throughout the district. We're talking about STEM. We talk about CT all the time, right? So the idea is we just talked about how we're surrounded by chemical plants and refineries and these different job opportunities. We want our students to have the very best when they're inside our programs. If a business is hiring for a craft or a skill set, we want to give them the opportunity to have the actual programs in their class before they ever step foot outside LPISD and get those, industry-based certifications. They're ready, and they're able to step into the workforce one step of the other students around us. And then transportation, 85 plus buses, 314 routes, our entire fleet. So replacement cycle of transportation and white fleet is in our bond program. Additionally, just some examples of what the slides look like. Each campus has their own allocated items. We've gone throughout the district up to this point, and we've presented, different items that are going to go to each campus, and they look different. If you're a campus that's been there for a long time, you may have a longer list than one of our newer campuses. But everybody has. Here's an example of the junior high at Lomax. There's a couple extra projects there with a competition gym. Renovation of our current auxiliary gym there into a fine arts space. When you look at the high school, there's a front entry component with a renovation there. We have some extreme flooding in the front entry of the high school. And these are really the two parts that were not touched in the 2014 bond, as well as renovating the current competition gym. We have severe termite damage. And wrapping up, A is the Bulldog Development Center. So what this is, it serves really two purposes, generally speaking. The bottom floor, it's a two-story facility. The bottom part of the facility is essentially a field house. It's got a weight room. It's got some storage space and some locker rooms. The current field house, through the process, will actually become a parking lot during the stadium construction. The top floor is a professional development space. So it seats up to 500 spectators, capacity, teachers, educators, civic component with city people. But what it does also, it breaks apart into 5 partition spaces to allow us to have professional development or really connect to any event that we may be hosting in that facility. So we'll move on to So B, again, is one-to-one. We currently go to about third, fourth grade, give or take, on one-to-one. So one device to one student. But there's two pieces to this proposition. That's the first one, is pushing that one-to-one with our students all the way down to kinder. And that'll be cart-based, so those students will have those at school. They'll check those out in the morning, and they'll put those up before they go home. And then part two of that, it's allowing our teachers to have devices. Currently, we do not fully provide our teachers with a device. There's a program, kind of a pay program that we use called TIPS. So they have the ability to get a device, but this proposition will allow our teachers to get it without having to pay. And they'll, as well as some other items in their classroom that will kind of enhance the teaching experience to be able to get them around the students and more connected to what we're doing as far as instruction. But B is allocated for 10 years, so it's replacement cycles 3 times to support 10 years of technology. So it's not we're buying them all at once and then we never look back at them. We'll constantly be refurbishing and replacing as we go through that process. Okay, we move to C, the final proposition. We have Bulldog Stadium. Just some history on Bulldog Stadium. The visitor side was built in 1958, the home side later in the 1960s. The press box was updated in 2007. Since 2006, the district has invested $19.3 million in the facility in various ways, whether it be just complete concrete scraping coming in, looking at new turf, an elevator putting in, drainage, press box, scoreboard, life safety repairs. But we're still seeing, to a point, too much damage. Sorry, it's cutting out. Damage that has caused the district to bring out an assessor, a civil engineer, to take a look at the stadium to just get perspective on, what decision needs to be made as far as repair versus a complete rebuild. Concerns fall in concrete, structure, and safety concerns. The facility is not ADA accessible. It currently has a 7-lane track. It requires an 8-lane track to be able to host UIL area events. And then we have increased concerns with site drainage. And if we have heavy rain, the north end of the stadium actually ponds, and then the actual turf bubbles up. And in some cases, we have to cut it to get the pressure out of it. So the site assessment was completed in 2021, and at that point in time, an estimated repair cost was 29 to 30 million, which would give you about an 8 to 10 year lifespan of that, or a complete rebuild at that point was 60 million, and obviously on the proposition, it's at 56. This is not just football stadium. 43% of our students, 875 of our students, use this facility every day. It's not just about the students. It's also a landmark for our city and community events, different hosting components, Special Olympics, and different items in there throughout the school year. It is a facility that is used every day in some just athletics, but even outside of that, and that doesn't even take into account in our junior highs that also come over and use it throughout the week. So it is a used facility. So, Proposition C, the new Bulldog Stadium was set on the same site. It does include additional seating, a new press box, an 8-lane track. It will be fully ADA compliant, capable of hosting large UIL events because it will have an 8-lane track. It will have a band contest deck, around 205 additional parking spots in the new plan, and then improved site drainage to where the field will not bubble. So to give you an idea of what we look like here, get you this next picture. So the idea behind some of the components of getting it there is the same site. So we didn't have the ability to expand the stadium like many would. When you're building a stadium, you've got land. You typically go wide with what you're doing. But in our case, if we go too wide, we'll be on top of Texas Street, or we'll be inside Bulldog Center. So that's why you see the horseshoe or the bowl look. It is what we call a concourse stadium. So 2 levels. The bottom level has 5 rows, and the top level has 7 rows. Once you enter the stadium, you can actually walk around the entire facility. On the south side, which is down here, there are 2 visiting locker rooms. So when the facility is rented out by other school districts, they never have to use our side. Bulldog Development is northeast on the plan there, closer to G Street. The reasoning behind the entry setting on G Street was to be able to connect with the already built facilities. Bulldog Center's entry is on the north side. Obviously, the traveling of tennis and band and baseball and softball and all that is on that side. So giving athletes and PE and different groups the ability to connect and have all that moving at the same motion was important during design. We also are trying to gain even more parking with the elementary and the junior high. So there'll be a concrete walkway path behind the elementary there lit up. So if you park in those lots, you're able to walk back there into the stadium. Just a quick look. So on the home side, I'm looking into the stadium and the stadium seats or the season ticket holder seats, looking at the Bulldog Development Center. So here on the visitor side, same view looking over at the press box. There is only one press box, which is different than the current setup, partly because we didn't want to obstruct the view of the Bulldog Center. And obviously that houses both home and visitor. Here's a good view of the concourse perspective. So the restroom and all the concession stands are actually underneath the top level of the stadium. So when you go, you'll actually go underneath there. Again, you can walk that entire concourse in that stadium. Again, the bottom row or the bottom section or bowl is 5 rows and the top is 7. Just another view, kind of looking to my left there, you'd be at Bulldog Center coming into the entry point looking at the press box. And this looks into the bowl. If we grow by 50,000 kids, and then at one point we could go ahead and close that off, we need to have the ability to close off and gain capacity in the future if need be. Look at the press box. Look at the concourse component. You can see the 5 rows at the bottom. You can see the full ADA compliance there with the seats there running throughout the entire stadium. And I close out here. Some of this is past, but early voting starts for us April 24th and runs through May 2nd, with Election Day being on May 6th. Important to note, early vote. We just ask that you vote. Our locations for early voting is the city of LaPorte, the city of Morgan's Point, city of Shore Acres, and then the Instructional Technology Center, which is right in James H. Baker's 6th grade. And then on the actual election day, May 6th, we pick up Heritage Elementary here, where we're actually presenting tonight. We'll pass this on to Dr. Jackson. Good to go. Any questions from anybody? Yes, sir. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, so we partner with Harris County Department of Ed, Safe and Secure Schools, and they come out and perform annual audits, and then they provide us feedback on how to stay current with guidelines, and then even further, they give us things that we can essentially be above where we need to be. That's one. We're also partnering with Region 4 on a new standard of what we need to meet as far as new standard that the state is putting out, but constantly working with LaPorte PD, Deer Park PD to ensure that we are constantly communicating on how we can be better and obviously what the bond can do to push us to the next as far as safety and security. Yes. Agencies. Every campus. That's a goal.
You know, stadium, my daughter played soccer
Yep.
in the court, and when you enter, before you enter the stadium, they have a wand there.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic idea. I wasn't offended by that at all, but it's because it's for everybody's protection. So I think that's something we need to consider also.
Yes, sir.
Sporting
Excellent.
events.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and actually with the setup of the stadium, the entry point setup is built to be able to do those type of things. And all that was in design and conversations we brought in.
And said, how can we do that and control that and have the ability to do that if that's an option for us. Great question.
See that 5, 10, 15 years, down the road.
Well, I don't know that we can guarantee that. I'd be lying to you if I told you, here's how we're going to guarantee that. But here's one thing that I've learned by living in the Bay for the last 3 years. Coming from Central Texas, where you didn't have the moisture in the air like we have here, our systems have to run, am I right, 24 hours a day. And so some of the things that people think maybe we didn't maintain properly, it was because they were having to be used 24 hours a day. I mean, you turn the system off around here, you come back in the morning, easily, it's wet, right? And so, am I right, Mr. Marlowe, on that? And so some of those things, we have to do it a little differently in the Bay. And so we're going to do everything that we can to get energy efficient systems and to maintain them and to maintenance them as regularly as possible. Like we do at our homes.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah, we got to keep
Yes,
up
sir.
with it.
Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
takes a schedule.
Yes, sir.
And all that.
And I think too, obviously we try to be good stewards of taxpayers' dollars. So when we look at those items, can we hang on? Can we continue to, is it the investment on what we're trying to do with some of our items, right? And I think those are decisions that we think very thoroughly on to ensure that we're only putting new things in place that are needed,
Yeah, and I think for me, humidity has to be controlled. I mean,
Yes.
obviously, we can't leave the lights on stadium
Right.
on all night, and that's being good stewards of
course.
taxpayers' dollars.
Yes.
But where humidity needs to be controlled, control
Yeah.
humidity.
Right.
So
That's right.
now with the stadium, I'm on Facebook, so
Sure.
you see a lot of chat going around on Facebook. But so is the stadium in repairable? It is in repairable condition, but it take about $30 million, just say on the average, to get it repaired.
Yeah, I'll go on record and say, we could possibly put $28 to $30 million into that stadium.
Yeah.
In 5 to 7 years, we'd be asking y'all again.
Yeah.
Do we want to put another $30 million in it?
Yeah.
Well, if you did that another 30 million times, you've already built the stadium that you wanted to build
Yeah,
for the
but
next 60
I
years.
think
Yes,
for
sir.
me, when I go hit the button, I just want to make
Sure,
sure
absolutely.
it's a good
Of course.
investment
It is.
for
It is a good
not only our city, but for me also.
Absolutely. Of
course.
I don't plan on going anywhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But that's what I want to
Sure.
make
Absolutely.
sure.
And I would even, would love to take you on a tour out there and let you see it. I think one thing that what we've gathered from taking people out there and showing, it's just a different lens. You don't look at it when you're there, if you spend time in the facility, you just kind of go and then when you go and go, well, let me actually look at the structure. It's, obviously.
No, I mean, I've seen it.
Yes,
I've
sir.
been in the stadium many times, and I've seen all the crackings and this and concrete, and things of that nature. And again, that's kind of paying for the sins from the past and not keeping up with it. Not that we could have done anything about the structure, because when they built the stadium, they didn't have the technology
That they have today. That's correct.
Exactly. So I completely understand
Yes, sir.
that.
And it is 65 years old.
Yes.
Even with all of the things that we've tried to do to maintain it, after a while, it's just putting good money after bad.
Yeah. And I know the turf has to be replaced. If you walk across the turf, it's in really bad shape also.
Yes.
Now, will y'all try to repurpose any of the items from the city?
Absolutely.
And I mean, if you can repurpose it in a school or have a city auction,
100%.
things like that.
Absolutely.
100%. There will be a full oversight committee after the bond, if the bond was to pass.
Yeah.
That will oversee all the different items that we said we were going to do, or this is how it's going to go.
And there'll be monthly presentations to
Yes.
the board about what we're doing and those kinds of things as well.
So is there an option out there for hybrid buses?
There are, as far as you're talking about fuel, hybrid.
Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of, I have a hybrid car that my wife talked me into. I really didn't like it. And I've grown to love it because it gets about 50 miles to the gallon, but it runs off gas and electricity, right? So I was just wondering if
I
that.
don't know about electricity. I'm thinking more propane is some options that they're pushing out, but that's something we can look into.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd just be an option to take a look at.
Of course.
And, that's why, where you can drive a little bit greener. I'm not
Right.
a tree hugger, but I think.
Well, your fuel cost would go down too.
Yeah, the fuel costs, like I say, I get 50 miles to the gallon, and that's pretty phenomenal.
Absolutely.
I think that y'all done a wonderful job with the presentation. I appreciate that. And thank you for y'all's time on that.
Any other questions?
What's going to happen to the old gym? What do you want to do with the old gym?
At Lomax, or
No, at the high school.
it's on schedule to be renovated.
Oh, okay.
Am I right? There's-
Yep. So it would be a complete renovation as far as the wood structure, the floor and so forth, and then an upgrade of the locker rooms that are in there.
And all those, like the soccer track and swimming, will all be put in a new facility? Or?
All that hasn't been fully allocated, but most of that answer would be yes. I think swimming would probably stay next to the mandatory with that. But, there's transition and all of that, so we'd have to look at that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
What is the current seating capacity at Bulldog Stadium? What would be the new?
We add about 600 extra, and I want to say we're at about 72, 74. How many we at right now? 74. And this puts us roughly a little over 800-ish right now. Yeah, 8,000, I'm sorry, not 800.
So what are y'all going to consider for football games once you start building?
We're already in talks with another school district, so clearly there would have to be some travel. We're trying to minimize that travel, but we're also trying to make sure that we keep Friday night lights. You lose a lot of any capacity if you start talking about having Saturday games or Thursday games. And so we've got a couple of options out there. We're trying to kind of keep that close to the vest, because what we don't want to do is say something and we haven't already got full permission from the district that we're going to be trying to work with. But we have a plan for that. Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I heard it takes about 2 years to build the stadium.
18 months to 24, 18 to 24 months. Yes,
So
sir.
it'll be one football season where all road games?
Well, yes, for sure one,
Yes, one for
but
sure.
we're not certain for the second one right now. And we don't want to go on record and say we'd be back, but we're certainly going to be working. It all depends on the weather. It all depends on how much it rains and those kinds of things,
Yes.
But we are ahead of the game in many ways because we've been working with an architect. And so what you see is actually the renderings of what it would look like, because we've taken the first 8 to 10 months to get that done. And so if this bond were to pass on May the 6th, we can get started.
Yeah.
We don't have to wait
Ground.
another 5 or 6 months for design. The design is already done. You just saw that. So that really puts us ahead of the game in many ways.
Are y'all gonna have different contractors bid on the stadium, or are y'all?
So we'll have a construction manager at risk that'll help us and take care of that. That will be that process, yeah. So obviously it takes risk off the district.
23 graduation will be here.
Yes.
24, we hadn't gotten that far just yet, but we're working on that. All right. I mean, that's, we got one next month. I know where that one's going to be, but we're in the process. And look, we want to do those things where we can stay close enough around home to where we know our stakeholders can get there in time, and we can still hold those. And that would come out very, very. Listen, before school kids start back in August, we will have all of that on the calendar for us. Okay.
I don't mind a facility that's got air conditioning stuff. I mean, I don't need that.
Our son's graduating 24.
Yeah.
That's why.
There you go.
When your kid, before he walks in and starts his senior year, he would know, and you will know where
He'll
that's
probably
going.
know first enough.
We just want to make sure we do that in a way to where we're respecting where we're trying to go and the people that are going to be traveling.
Yeah, and I think that you said it best a while back. You said that if they don't get a walk, in the port,
Yeah.
we'll bring them back.
Oh, we're going
Of course.
to. That's going to happen.
And I really respect that.
That's going to happen. We're going to plan some ceremonies for that. I mean, the night we open the place, there's going to be people that walk out there before even our own folks, because we want to make sure the students that did not get an opportunity to be there, will get that. And we get it. Listen, all of this passes, great, but at the end of the day, we get it. That a lot of this is about emotions and years of, you've known Bulldog Stadium all your life. So we want to make certain that even with the renderings of the new one, that we blend some of the things from the past with that, so that we can have a bridge between the two.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I'm not emotional about Bulldog Stadium or anything, you know, I just want to make sure when we vote on something.
Yes, sir.
That we're heading in the right direction.
Well, we're headed in the right direction.
City, sure.
Yes, sir.
Our student life there as well. And, you know, I think another thing that needs to be done, it's not a part of this, but, you know, is getting good talent to report too. I mean, teachers and principals, and I think we have a lot of great talent, but we've lost a lot of great talent also. And we really need to come up with a plan.
The last 5 years, a lot of people have retired. A lot of people have
You've
moved
had some
around.
attrition.
Yeah, that's right.
People have moved
Yeah.
around, but I think at the end of the day, we need to pay more, and we need to figure that out.
I think this is some good talent we just brought in too.
Well, I would agree.
Yeah,
So-
I think this is some good talent over here. But
Well,
we're working on it.
I
We're
think
working
the
on
officer Matt's great talent. Y'all lucky to have him.
it. So we are very fortunate.
So, but anyway, I mean, I think that's something in the future that we really need to look at also, Dr. Jackson.
Well, listen, I agree with that. But as I said at the very, very beginning of this meeting, bonds and these kinds of meetings tell us all about our values.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, how you set up your school district for success, it attracts the people that we
Yeah,
want
I
here
had
to.
that conversation
It attracts the
2 years
folks
ago.
that you want.
You asked me the question,
Yeah.
why does everybody go to their part?
I did.
And I think this is a good start in bringing them back.
Good deal. Good deal. That's right.
So what happens if?
Well,
I hate to ask. but
Yeah.
I have to ask.
we our goal would be, we'd be quite devastated, but then we come up with a plan to come back at it again.
Yeah.
Okay, we come back at it again, all right? Because this is for the students in the future of this community. And so we come back, we come back at it again. That's my short answer. Any other questions? In the back over there? All right, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
This has nothing to do with the bond, but I was just curious with the addition of Morgan's Landing and the apartments on 146 and new homes. Would there be a need for a new elementary in that area?
I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening in the next year or two. That certainly may be in the future of LaPorte, but we're just not seeing a flood of students coming in. I think in the future, there's certainly going to be a lot of growth coming this way, but I don't see that happening in the next 2 years alone. Okay?
Who's going to be responsible to oversee all the money as it comes in on bonds?
We have a chief financial officer, Ms. Stacy McDowell, and and we work very closely together. I mean, ultimately, the superintendent is responsible for it all, right? But we have a more than capable chief financial officer that helps to lead and guide our school district with the finances. Okay. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.